the door slammed shut behind me. For a second, I thought it was an accident, but then I heard the unmistakable sound of a lock clicking from the outside. Ethan, I called, confused. My son's voice came through the door, cold and impatient. "Mom, just stay down there until the wedding is over. You'll only embarrass us." I stood frozen in the dim basement of the Napa Valley estate, my heart pounding. Upstairs, 400 guests were celebrating my son's wedding. Down here, I was locked away like a secret no one wanted to see. What Ethan didn't know was that inside my purse were documents transferring a $*$ 45 million wedding gift ** to him. And he had just locked the only person bringing that gift in a basement. If this story already shocked you, take a second to ** like the video and subscribe ** to the channel. Stories like this remind us how complicated family can be. And I'm curious, ***, where are you watching from today? And what time is it there, ***? Let me know in the comments. I read as many of them as I can. Now let me tell you how I ended up locked in my own son's wedding basement. My name is ***, Laura Jackson, ***. And until that moment in the basement, I had spent most of my life believing that love and hard work could fix almost anything. I was 63 years old on the day my son locked me downstairs during his wedding. If you had met me on the street, you probably wouldn't have guessed much about my life. I dressed simply. I drove a modest sedan. My house in Chicago was the same brick home I had bought decades ago when my business was still struggling. Most people assumed I was just another retired small business owner. In a way, that assumption had always been intentional. 35 years earlier, when I was 28, I had opened a tiny bakery on the south side of Chicago. It was barely bigger than a garage. The oven was secondhand, the countertops were scratched, and the sign outside was painted by a friend who owed me a favor. Back then, I wasn't dreaming of millions. I was just trying to survive. My husband, ***, Michael Jackson, ***, and I had taken out a loan we could barely afford. We worked side by side every day, waking before sunrise to mix dough and staying late into the night, cleaning flour from the floors. Our son Ethan was only 3 years old at the time. Many nights he slept on a small blanket behind the counter while we worked. Those were exhausting years, but they were also some of the happiest. Customers began to come back. Then they brought friends. Soon the neighborhood knew our bakery for its cinnamon rolls and homemade bread. What started as a single shop slowly grew. After 10 years, we opened a second location, then a third, then a small production kitchen that allowed us to supply grocery stores with frozen pastries. The company eventually became ***, Jackson Foods ***. I didn't realize it at the time, but we were building something far bigger than the bakery we started with. Then life changed in a way I never expected. When Ethan was 12 years old, Michael died in a car accident. It happened on a rainy evening when he was driving home from a supplier meeting. The police officer who came to the door spoke softly, but his words shattered everything. Suddenly, I was a widow, a business owner, and a single mother all at once. For months, I felt like I was drowning. But I had a child who needed me, and a company that employed dozens of people who depended on their paychecks. So I kept going. I worked longer hours than ever before. Some days, I left the house at 5 a.m. and didn't return until after midnight. Ethan spent many afternoons doing homework in my office while I met with suppliers or negotiated contracts. I worried constantly that I wasn't giving him enough attention, but he never complained. In fact, Ethan used to tell his teachers proudly that his mom owned the bakery that made the best cinnamon rolls in Chicago. He would walk into the kitchen after school, hug me around the waist, and ask if there were any broken cookies he could eat. Those memories stayed with me for years. They were the reason I pushed myself so hard. Jackson Foods kept growing. We expanded into frozen breakfast foods, then into packaged desserts sold across the Midwest. Eventually, our products were stocked in grocery chains across 17 states. Investors began calling. Business magazines wrote small articles about the bakery company that kept expanding. By the time Ethan graduated from college, Jackson Foods had become a national brand. 6 years ago, when I was 57, a large food corporation offered to buy the company. The deal was worth $280 million I remember staring at the number on the contract, feeling almost dizzy. It was more money than I had ever imagined. But after decades of work, I was tired, and I wanted to spend more time with my son. So I sold the company. After taxes and investments, the money was more than enough to last several lifetimes. But something about that number made me uncomfortable. Wealth has a strange way of changing people. I had seen it happen to other business owners. Friends who once seemed grounded suddenly measured everything in luxury cars, vacation homes, and status. I never wanted that life, so I made a decision. I would live quietly. I kept the same house. I drove the same car. Most people, even some distant relatives, had no idea how much money I actually had. And Ethan, he knew that I had sold the company and done well, but he never knew the full amount. I never showed him investment statements or talked about exact numbers. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I wanted him to build his own life without depending on mine. After college, Ethan moved to San Francisco. He started working as a marketing consultant for a technology firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a good career path, and he seemed excited about it. For the first few years, we talked constantly. He called every Sunday. Sometimes we spent hours on the phone discussing his projects, his coworkers, and the restaurants he had discovered in the city. When he came home for holidays, he helped me cook dinner just like he used to when he was younger. I believed we had made it through the hardest years. I thought we were close. Looking back now, I realized that was the last time things truly felt simple. Because everything started to change the year Ethan met Olivia Whitmore. At first, he sounded happier than I had ever heard him. He told me she was brilliant, elegant, and came from a family deeply involved in California real estate development. Her parents, Charles and Victoria Whitmore, were well known in wealthy social circles. Ethan seemed proud of that. At the time, I didn't think much about it. People fall in love with all kinds of partners. Backgrounds don't have to match perfectly for relationships to work. But slowly over the next year, small things began to shift. Ethan called less often. When we did speak, our conversations felt shorter, more formal. Sometimes I would ask about his life, and he would answer quickly before changing the subject. Then one evening, during a phone call, he told me something that should have been wonderful news. "Mom," he said, "I'm going to propose." I remember smiling as I held the phone. "That's amazing," I said. "I'm happy for you." And I truly meant it. But even through the phone, I sensed something different in his voice, something distant. What I didn't realize at that moment was that the woman Ethan was about to marry and the world her family lived in would slowly convince my son that the mother who built his life was someone he should be ashamed of. And eventually that belief would lead him to lock me in a basement on the most important day of his life. Before Olivia Whitmore entered Ethan's life, my son had always been the kind of person who noticed the little things. He remembered birthdays. He brought flowers to neighbors when they were sick. When he was in college, he once drove 4 hours back to Chicago just to surprise me on Mother's Day. That was the Ethan I knew. The Ethan who used to sit at the kitchen counter eating warm cookies while telling me about his dreams. After his father died, we became more than just mother and son. We became a team. I still remember one night when Ethan was about 13. I had fallen asleep at my desk in the office after a 16-hour day. When I woke up, there was a blanket over my shoulders and a note beside my coffee mug. It said, "Asterisk. You're the strongest person I know. One day I'm going to make you proud, asterisk." I kept that note for years. Even now I can still picture his messy handwriting. For a long time, Ethan truly was that boy. He worked hard in school and earned a scholarship to attend the University of California, Berkeley, I was incredibly proud the day we moved him into his dorm. He hugged me in the parking lot and said, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll call every week." And he did. For 4 years, he called regularly. He told me about his classes, his roommates, the professors who terrified him, and the ones who inspired him. When he graduated with a degree in business and marketing, I flew to California to watch him walk across the stage. I remember clapping so hard my hands hurt. After graduation, Ethan decided to stay in San Francisco. He found a job with a marketing firm that worked with tech startups. It wasn't the kind of glamorous career you see in movies, but it was stable, and it gave him opportunities to grow. For the first couple of years, his life seemed balanced. He worked hard during the week and explored the city on weekends. Sometimes he sent me photos of the Golden Gate Bridge at sunset or pictures of strange-looking food he had tried at trendy restaurants. Whenever he visited Chicago, he still insisted on stopping by the small bakery building where Jackson Foods had started. Even though the original shop had been converted into offices long ago, he liked standing outside the building. "That's where everything began," he once told me. It made me happy to know he still remembered. But things started to shift about 3 years before his wedding. That was when Ethan called one evening and told me about a woman he had just met. Her name was Olivia Whitmore. "She's incredible, Mom," he said during that first phone call. "She's smart, confident, and she works in event management for high-end corporate clients." He sounded excited in a way I hadn't heard before. Naturally, I wanted to know everything. "How did you meet her?" I asked. "At a networking event," Ethan replied. "Her company was organizing the event, and we ended up talking for almost an hour." He laughed a little as he spoke. "She's different from anyone I've dated before." At the time, I assumed that was a good thing. Over the next few months, Olivia became a regular topic during our calls. Ethan told me she had grown up in a wealthy family in Northern California. Her father, Charles Whitmore, owned several major commercial real estate developments, including luxury hotels and shopping centers. Her mother, Victoria Whitmore, was deeply involved in charity galas and elite social clubs. The Whitmores lived in a world of expensive wine tastings, country clubs, and charity auctions. It was a lifestyle very different from the one Ethan had grown up with. At first, none of that worried me. People come from different backgrounds all the time. What mattered was whether Olivia made Ethan happy. About 6 months into their relationship, Ethan told me he wanted me to meet her. They planned a trip to Chicago during the holidays. I spent 2 days preparing the house. Even though I had more money than I could ever spend, I still enjoyed doing things the old-fashioned way. I cooked most of the dinner myself and decorated the dining table with candles and fresh flowers. When Ethan and Olivia arrived, I noticed something immediately. Olivia was beautiful, tall, elegant, and perfectly dressed as if she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. Her smile was polite, but measured the kind people use when they're evaluating someone they just met. She shook my hand instead of hugging me. "Mrs. Jackson," she said, her voice smooth. "It's nice to finally meet you." "Please," I replied with a warm smile. "Call me Laura." Dinner started pleasantly enough. Ethan seemed nervous but excited, and Olivia asked a few polite questions about Chicago and my hobbies. But the tone of the evening shifted when she asked about my work. "So Ethan told me you used to own a bakery," Olivia said. "Yes," I replied, "a long time ago. It eventually grew into a food company." "What kind of company?" she asked. "Frozen pastries and desserts," I explained. "It became Jackson Foods." For a moment she looked thoughtful, as if trying to place the name. Then she nodded slowly. "Oh," she said, "that sounds charming." The way she said the word charming felt strange. Not insulting exactly, but not respectful either. I noticed Ethan watching her reaction carefully, almost nervously. The rest of the dinner continued, but something subtle had changed. Olivia seemed friendly enough, yet there was a certain distance in the way she spoke to me. Her questions became less curious and more observational, as if she were quietly studying the environment. At one point, she looked around the house. "You've lived here a long time," she asked. "Almost 30 years, I replied. "It has a very classic feel." Again, her tone carried that same polite evaluation. Ethan jumped in quickly. "Mom likes keeping things simple," he said. I didn't think much about it at the time. But looking back now, that dinner was the first moment I sensed the invisible line that Olivia, and perhaps Ethan, too, had begun drawing between their world and mine. After they returned to California, Ethan's calls became less frequent. Sometimes weeks passed without hearing from him. When we did talk, Olivia's name came up constantly. She had introduced Ethan to a whole new social circle. Young professionals, investors, people connected to her family's real estate empire. They attended events at luxury hotels, rooftop parties, charity galas. It was a lifestyle far removed from the simple bakery kitchen where Ethan had spent so much of his childhood. I didn't resent that. Every parent wants their child to experience success and opportunity. But gradually our conversations began to feel different, shorter, less personal. Sometimes, when I asked about his work or his life, Ethan would give quick answers before steering the conversation elsewhere. At first I told myself it was normal. Adults grow busy, relationships evolve. But one evening, nearly a year after Ethan first mentioned Olivia, he called with news that changed everything. His voice sounded both excited and nervous. "Mom," he said, "I'm going to propose." For a moment, my heart filled with joy. "That's wonderful," I told him sincerely. "Really?" "Of course," I said. "If she makes you happy, that's all that matters." There was a short pause on the phone. Then Ethan said something that felt strange at the time but would make much more sense later. "Her family is very particular about certain things," he said carefully. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Just social expectations," he replied. "They're used to a certain kind of lifestyle." I laughed softly. "Well, that's their world," I said. "It doesn't have to be ours." But Ethan didn't laugh. Instead, he said quietly, "Yeah, I guess." What I didn't realize then was that Ethan had already begun trying to fit himself into the Whitmore family's world. And the first step in doing that was slowly distancing himself from the woman who had raised him, the woman who had built everything he had, his mother. The first time I met Charles and Victoria Whitmore, was about 3 months after Ethan told me he planned to propose. Olivia had insisted that both families should meet before anything became official. According to Ethan, it was important for everyone to get to know each other. The dinner was arranged at an upscale restaurant in San Francisco, overlooking the bay. Ethan suggested I fly out from Chicago for the occasion. I remember standing outside the restaurant that evening, watching the lights of the city reflecting off the water. It was beautiful, but I felt oddly nervous. Meeting the parents of the woman your child plans to marry always carries a certain weight. Still, I told myself there was nothing to worry about. We were simply two families coming together. Inside the restaurant, the hostess led me to a private dining room. Ethan and Olivia were already there. Ethan stood up immediately and hugged me, though the embrace felt brief, almost distracted. "Mom, you made it," he said. Of course, I smiled. I wouldn't miss this. Olivia greeted me politely, though just like the first time we met, she shook my hand instead of hugging me. "Laura, it's good to see you again," she said. A few minutes later, the Whitmores arrived. Charles Whitmore. Was tall with silver hair and the calm confidence of someone used to being the most powerful person in the room. He wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than my first bakery oven. His wife, Victoria Whitmore, followed beside him. She was impeccably dressed, every detail of her appearance perfectly curated from her jewelry to the elegant way she held her purse. They greeted Ethan warmly. Then Charles turned to me. "So you're Laura," he said, extending his hand. "That's right," I replied. His handshake was firm, though his smile felt more professional than friendly. Victoria looked me over quickly before speaking. "It's nice to meet you," she said. "Olivia has mentioned you." The way she said it sounded almost like an evaluation. We all sat down at the long table. At first, the conversation remained polite. The restaurant staff brought wine, and Charles ordered several dishes for everyone to share. Charles spoke easily about real estate markets and investment opportunities across California. It was clear he was accustomed to leading conversations. Victoria discussed charity events she organized each year. Olivia added small details about the guest lists and planning involved. Ethan seemed eager to participate in their world, nodding along and occasionally adding comments about marketing trends or business strategies. I mostly listened. Eventually, Charles turned toward me. "So Laura," he said, leaning back in his chair, "Ethan mentioned you ran a bakery business for many years." "Yes," I replied calmly, "just a local shop." His tone was curious, but something about the phrasing made the question feel smaller than it should have been. Well, I said it started as a small bakery, but it eventually grew into a food company. "What kind of products?" he asked. "Frozen pastries and desserts. We supplied several grocery chains across the Midwest." Charles nodded slowly. "That sounds like a solid operation." Victoria raised an eyebrow slightly. "And you sold it?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "How interesting." Her expression remained pleasant, but there was a subtle distance in her voice. "And what do you do now?" she asked. "I'm mostly retired," I replied. "Retired from baking?" she asked lightly. I smiled politely. "From running the company?" Victoria nodded, though the look she exchanged with her husband didn't escape me. At that moment, Olivia spoke up. "My mother organizes several charity galas every year," she said. "They're quite large events." "That sounds impressive," I replied sincerely. Victoria smiled modestly. Oh, they're nothing extraordinary, just gatherings for people who enjoy giving back. Charles chuckled softly. They're actually some of the biggest social events in Northern California, he added. Olivia laughed with him. Ethan glanced briefly at me, then back to Olivia's parents. For the rest of the evening, the conversation remained centered around the Whitmore's world. Luxury developments, fundraising galas, private golf clubs, investment partnerships. It wasn't that they were rude exactly, but there was a constant undercurrent, an unspoken message that their lifestyle existed on a level far above anything else. At one point, Victoria turned toward me again. So Laura, she said, swirling the wine in her glass, Ethan told us you originally worked as a baker. Yes, I replied. She smiled politely. That's quite charming. That word again. Asterisk charming asterisk. The same word Olivia had used months earlier. It sounded harmless on the surface, but the way Victoria said it carried the faintest trace of condescension, as if she were describing a quaint hobby rather than the business that had supported my family for decades. Ethan shifted slightly in his seat. He didn't correct her. He didn't explain that the bakery had grown into a national company. He simply remained quiet. That silence spoke louder than anything else. Dinner continued for another hour. By the time dessert arrived, Charles leaned forward with a satisfied smile. Well, he said, I think it's safe to say our children have excellent taste. Everyone laughed lightly. Then he added, when the engagement happens, we'll make sure the wedding is memorable. Victoria nodded. The Whitmore family has certain traditions when it comes to weddings, she said. Olivia smiled proudly. Ethan looked both excited and slightly nervous. I raised my glass. To their happiness, I said. Everyone clinked glasses. But as I sat there watching them, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Whitmore family saw me as something temporary. A polite obligation, a background detail. Someone who would attend the wedding quietly and remain on the sidelines. At the end of the dinner, Charles walked me toward the exit while Ethan and Olivia spoke with the restaurant manager. You've raised an ambitious young man, Charles said. Thank you, I replied. He nodded thoughtfully. Olivia has always had very high standards, he said. I didn't respond immediately. Then he added almost casually, our family operates in certain circles. Social expectations can be particular. I understand, I said calmly. Charles smiled politely. I'm sure you do. Outside the restaurant, the cool San Francisco air felt refreshing after the formal atmosphere of the dining room. Ethan joined me at the curb while we waited for my car. You did great tonight, Mom, he said. Did I asked gently. Yeah, he replied quickly. There was an awkward pause. Then he said something that lingered in my mind long after that evening ended. They're just used to a different environment. I studied his face. You mean wealthier people, I asked. He hesitated. Well, yeah, I smiled softly. Ethan people can come from different backgrounds and still respect each other. I know, he said, but his voice didn't sound entirely convinced. As my car arrived, he hugged me goodbye. Thanks for coming, he said. Always, I replied. As the driver pulled away, I looked back through the window and saw Ethan standing beside Olivia and her parents. They looked perfectly comfortable together, like a family that had always belonged to the same world. What I didn't realize that night was that Ethan had already begun measuring his life by the standards of the Whitmore family, and in that comparison, the mother who built everything for him was slowly becoming someone he felt embarrassed by. A few weeks after that dinner in San Francisco, Ethan called me with the news I had been expecting. Mom, he said, his voice filled with excitement. She said yes. I smiled the moment I heard it. I'm happy for you, I told him, truly. Ethan sounded relieved, as if he had been nervous about how I might react, but there had never been any reason for that. Olivia might not have felt entirely warm toward me, but she clearly meant a great deal to my son. And that was enough. Her parents want to host an engagement dinner, Ethan continued. They're planning something small, just family and a few close friends. When is it, I asked. Next month, he replied, at one of their favorite restaurants in San Francisco. I agreed to fly out again without hesitation. Part of me hoped that the engagement celebration might feel more relaxed than our first meeting. Maybe now that the families were officially connected, things would feel more natural. But I was wrong. The engagement dinner was held at an exclusive restaurant overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The building itself looked more like a private club than a restaurant with tall glass walls and a valet line full of luxury cars. Inside, the dining room had been reserved entirely for the event. There were about 30 guests, mostly friends of the Whitmore family, Many of them appeared to know Charles and Victoria well, greeting them with the familiarity of long-standing social circles. I noticed immediately that I was the only person there who seemed to be meeting everyone for the first time. Olivia greeted me politely when I arrived. "Laura, thank you for coming," she said. She kissed Ethan lightly on the cheek before introducing me to several guests. "This is Ethan's mother," she said. "Not Laura. Not the woman who raised him. Just Ethan's mother asterisk." It was a small detail, but it felt strangely formal. The evening began with champagne and appetizers while guests mingled. I stood near a large window overlooking the ocean, occasionally making polite conversation with people who asked how I knew the couple. Most of them assumed I was part of Olivia's extended family. One woman even asked me which side of the Whitmore family I belonged to. I simply smiled and said I was Ethan's mother. Her expression shifted slightly in surprise. "Oh," she said. As dinner began, everyone moved to a long table decorated with flowers and candles. I noticed the seating arrangement immediately. Charles and Victoria sat at the center of the table with Ethan and Olivia beside them. The remaining seats were arranged along the sides. My name card was placed near the far end, not at the center with the immediate family. Not even close, just somewhere down the line. For a moment I considered saying something, but I didn't. It was their event after all. The dinner itself was elegant, multiple courses, carefully paired wines, attentive service. Charles gave a short toast about family and tradition. Victoria spoke about how proud she was of Olivia. When it came time for Ethan to say a few words, he stood and smiled nervously. "I just want to thank everyone for being here," he said. "Olivia and I are excited about building a life together." Then he glanced briefly down the table. "Mom," he added quickly, "thank you for coming all this way." That was it. One sentence. The guests applauded politely. I smiled and raised my glass. But deep inside, something felt different. After the meal, people gathered again near the windows for coffee and dessert. Victoria approached me with a pleasant smile. "Laura," she said, "I wanted to talk to you about the wedding." "Of course," I replied. "We're planning to host the ceremony at our property in *** Napa Valley. ***, she explained. "It's a beautiful estate with vineyards and a large garden area." "That sounds lovely," I said. "It should be quite an event," she continued. "Many of Charles's business partners and several high-profile guests will be attending." She paused before adding, "There will be around 400 people." 400? That was far larger than the weddings I had imagined for Ethan. But I simply nodded. "I'm sure it will be wonderful." Victoria studied my expression for a moment. Then she said something that caught me off guard. "There's just one small thing we should discuss." "Yes," I asked. "Well," she said carefully, "our events tend to follow a certain level of formality. The guest list includes many people who are accustomed to particular social settings." I waited. She continued, "So we thought it might be best if the family seating arrangements were handled carefully." "What do you mean?" I asked. Victoria smiled in a way that felt reassuring but firm. "The main table will be reserved for the bride and groom along with Charles and me and a few key family members." "I understand," I said. "And of course," she added quickly, "you will absolutely be seated with the family." There was another pause. Just not necessarily at the main table. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. It wasn't an outright insult, but it was very clear what she meant. They didn't want me sitting beside them in front of their most important guests. Before I could answer, Ethan suddenly appeared beside us. "What are you two talking about?" he asked. "Just wedding arrangements," Victoria said smoothly. Ethan glanced between us. Then he turned toward me. "Mom, the wedding's going to be a pretty big deal," he said. "Lots of Olivia's parents' business partners and investors will be there." I waited to hear what he would say next. "Just try to keep things simple," he added. The words landed heavier than he probably intended. "Simple?" I asked. "You know," Ethan said awkwardly, "nothing too attention-grabbing." For a moment, I saw the nervous boy who used to leave notes on my desk. But now there was something else mixed with it. Embarrassment. Fear of how I might appear in front of his new world. I forced a small smile. "I'll behave myself," I said lightly. Ethan laughed in relief. "Thanks, Mom. I'm on." Victoria looked satisfied. "Wonderful," she said. As the evening continued, guests began leaving one by one. When I finally returned to my hotel room later that night, I sat by the window overlooking the dark ocean. The waves rolled quietly against the shore. I thought about everything that had happened during the dinner. The seating arrangement. The careful words about formality. Ethan's comment about not attracting attention. For the first time, I wondered if my son was beginning to feel something he had never felt before. Shame. Shame about the woman who had raised him. But even then, I refused to believe it completely. Because no matter how uncomfortable the evening had been, I still trusted one thing. Deep down, Ethan was still the boy who had covered me with a blanket when I fell asleep at my desk. And I believed that boy would never truly turn his back on me. What I didn't know yet was that the wedding day would prove just how wrong I was. The wedding planning began almost immediately after the engagement dinner. Within a week, Olivia had already hired a team of event planners, designers, and coordinators. From what Ethan told me, the wedding was shaping up to be less like a family celebration and more like a high-profile social event. The location would be the Whitmore family estate in ***, Napa Valley, ***, a sprawling vineyard property with rolling hills, private gardens, and a mansion that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Ethan sounded excited every time he talked about it. They're building a glass pavilion in the vineyard for the ceremony, he said during one phone call. And there's going to be a live orchestra during the reception. I could hear the pride in his voice. And despite everything that had happened at the engagement dinner, I wanted to share that excitement with him. That sounds beautiful, I told him. It's going to be incredible, he replied. But there was something he didn't mention. The cost. A few weeks later, I received a call from the wedding planner. Her name was ***, Amanda Blake ***, and she sounded professional but slightly nervous. Mrs. Jackson, she asked, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Not at all, I said. I'm coordinating the Jackson-Whitmore wedding, she continued. I wanted to confirm some details regarding the payment schedule. Payment schedule, I asked. There was a brief pause on the line. Yes, she said carefully. Mr. Whitmore informed us that you would be handling the financial arrangements. For a moment, I said nothing. Then I realized what had happened. Charles Whitmore had apparently told the wedding planner that I would cover the costs. Without asking me, it might have been insulting if it hadn't been so strangely amusing. After all the wedding budget she was referring to around $2.5 million was a fraction of what I could afford. Still, I asked a simple question. Has anyone discussed this with Ethan? I said. Amanda hesitated. I believe Mr. Whitmore mentioned it during a planning meeting, she replied. Did Ethan agree, I asked. I assume so, she said. That answer told me everything I needed to know. Ethan had probably been told that his mother would pay for the wedding and he hadn't objected. Perhaps he believed it was simply expected. Perhaps he didn't think about it at all. Either way, I made a decision right then. Yes, I told Amanda. Please send the invoices directly to me. She sounded relieved. Of course, she said, thank you, Mrs. Jackson. Over the next several months, the bills arrived regularly. Venue preparation, catering, floral installations, lighting systems, a live orchestra, designer furniture rentals. Each invoice was larger than the last, but I paid them all quietly. I never mentioned it to Ethan, and I certainly never mentioned it to the Whitmores. If they assumed I was simply the bakery mother writing checks for the wedding out of sentimental generosity, that was fine with me. What mattered was that Ethan would have the celebration he dreamed of. Still, as the months passed, I noticed something else. My son was slowly becoming someone I barely recognized. Our phone calls grew shorter. Sometimes he seemed distracted, as if he were juggling too many responsibilities. Other times he sounded strangely tense. Once during a call about the wedding arrangements, he said something that caught me off guard. Mom, when you come to the ceremony, try to keep things low-key. I blinked in surprise. Low-key. You know, he said quickly. The guest list includes some pretty high-profile people. Investors, executives, people my firm works with. And I asked gently, well, Olivia's parents are very particular about appearances. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Ethan, I said calmly, are you worried about how I'll behave at your wedding? No, he said quickly. Of course not. But the hesitation in his voice told me otherwise. It's just different from the kind of events you're used to, he added. I almost laughed at that. He had no idea that the investment firms managing my assets hosted dinners far more exclusive than anything the Whitmore family organized. But I had never told him that. And I wasn't about to start now. I'll be fine, I said simply. Good, he replied, sounding relieved. Despite those moments, I still held on to hope. I believed that once the wedding day arrived, emotions would settle and things would feel normal again. After all, weddings are stressful. People say things they don't mean. Maybe Ethan was simply overwhelmed. But there were other signs that I couldn't ignore. One afternoon, Olivia called me directly. It was unusual she rarely contacted me without Ethan being involved. "Laura," she said politely, "I wanted to talk about the seating arrangements for the reception." "All right," I said. "As you know, the main table will be reserved for the immediate families and several important guests." "Yes," I replied, remembering Victoria's earlier comment. "Well," Olivia continued, "we've decided to place you at a table with some extended relatives and family friends." "Of course," I said. "That way everything will feel balanced," she added quickly. I could almost hear the unspoken part of her sentence. *balanced for their image. But I didn't argue. "Whatever makes the day easier for you," I told her. "Thank you," she said, sounding relieved. Before ending the call, she added something else. "Oh, and there will be a dress code for guests." "A dress code?" "Yes, the event will be formal black tie." "That's fine," I said. There was a small pause. "And Laura, try to avoid anything too casual." The implication was clear. She was worried I might show up looking out of place. After the call ended, I sat quietly in my living room for a long time. Not because I was angry, but because I was trying to understand how things had changed so much between Ethan and me. The boy who once slept on a blanket in my bakery now seemed concerned that his mother might embarrass him at a luxury wedding. Still, I refused to let bitterness take over. Instead, I focused on something far more important. The **gift***. A few weeks before the wedding, I met with my lawyer in Chicago. His name was Daniel Brooks and he had handled my financial affairs for nearly a decade. When I told him about my plan, he looked surprised. "You want to transfer 45% of Jackson Holdings to Ethan as a wedding gift?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "That's worth approximately $45 million, he said carefully. "I know." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "That's a significant amount of wealth to place in someone's hands." "It's not just money," I explained. "It's responsibility. The shares would give Ethan control over a large portion of my investment portfolio. He would essentially become the next steward of the family's financial legacy." Daniel studied me for a moment. "Are you certain he's ready for that?" he asked. I thought about Ethan as a child, about the boy who left me encouraging notes on my desk. "Yes," I said quietly. "I believe he is." Daniel prepared the documents. All that remained was for Ethan to sign them after the wedding ceremony. My plan was simple. During the reception speeches, I would stand up, congratulate the newlyweds, and present the gift publicly. A symbolic moment. A way to show Ethan that I trusted him completely. As I left Daniel's office that afternoon, the folder containing the legal documents rested safely in my purse. $45 million, a lifetime of work, all prepared as a gift for my son. What I didn't know was that only days later, on the morning of his wedding, that same purse would be sitting beside me in a dark basement, while the celebration continued upstairs without me. The week before the wedding, I flew to Napa Valley, Even though the ceremony wasn't until Saturday, Olivia's family had arranged several pre-wedding events, a rehearsal dinner, a welcome reception for guests arriving from out of town, and a vineyard tour for close friends. The Whitmore estate was even more impressive than I had imagined. The property stretched across hundreds of acres of vineyards with rows of grapevines running down gentle hills toward the horizon. The main house was enormous stone walls, tall windows and terraces that overlooked the valley. Workers and event planners moved everywhere across the grounds. Large white tents were being assembled in the garden. Technicians were installing lighting systems along the vineyard paths. Florists carried enormous arrangements of roses and peonies into the reception hall. It looked less like a wedding and more like the preparation for a luxury film premiere. When my car pulled into the driveway, a valet greeted me and took my suitcase. Inside the mansion, a young assistant directed me to one of the guest suites. "Mrs. Jackson, this room has been prepared for you," she said politely. The suite was beautiful, larger than many hotel apartments, with tall windows overlooking the vineyards. But as I unpacked my things, I noticed something. None of the other family members were staying in the same wing of the house. Their rooms were on the upper floor near the main staircase. Mine was on the far side of the building, close to the staff corridor. It wasn't a terrible room, but it was clearly separated. Still, I told myself not to read too much into it. The house was enormous. Maybe this was simply how the rooms had been arranged. Later that afternoon, I walked outside to explore the grounds. Near the garden, I saw Ethan speaking with the wedding planner, Amanda Blake. He looked stressed. When he noticed me approaching, he gave a quick smile. "Mom, you made it," he said. I hugged him. "You look exhausted," I said. "Wedding planning is a lot more complicated than I thought," he admitted. Amanda smiled politely and excused herself, leaving us alone. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "Olivia's parents want everything perfect," he said. "There are so many details." "I'm sure it will be beautiful," I replied. He nodded. Then he glanced around, lowering his voice slightly. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Just try to keep things simple during the weekend." There was that word again. Simple. I looked at him. "Ethan, what exactly are you worried about?" He hesitated. "It's just that a lot of important people are coming," he said. "Investors, executives, people who could help my career." "And you're worried about how I'll look to them?" I asked calmly. "That's not what I meant," he said quickly. But the pause before his answer told me everything. I forced a small smile. "Don't worry," I said. "I'm not planning to steal the spotlight." Ethan looked relieved. "Thanks, Mom." Later that evening, the welcome reception began. Guests gathered on a terrace overlooking the vineyard, sipping champagne, while a small jazz band played softly in the background. I spent most of the evening observing. The Whitmore family moved comfortably among their guests, greeting people with the confidence of hosts used to this kind of attention. Charles Whitmore introduced Ethan to several business partners. Victoria Whitmore floated through the crowd like a practiced socialite, making sure everything ran smoothly. Olivia looked stunning in a white cocktail dress, smiling gracefully as she spoke with friends. I noticed something else, too. Whenever someone asked about Ethan's family, Olivia's introduction was always the same. "This is Ethan's mother." No mention of my name, no mention of anything else. Just a title. It was subtle, but intentional. At one point during the evening, I overheard two guests speaking nearby. "Which side of the family is she from?" one of them asked quietly. "I think she's Ethan's mother," the other replied. "Oh," the first person said, sounding slightly surprised. That reaction told me what I already suspected. In this world, they had assumed Ethan came from the same background as Olivia. Wealthy, elite, part of their circle. The truth that his mother had started as a baker didn't fit the image they expected. The next evening was the rehearsal dinner. This event was more intimate, held inside the mansion's grand dining hall. About 50 people attended, mostly close family members, and the wedding party. The seating arrangement once again placed the Whitmores at the center of the long table. Ethan and Olivia sat beside them. I was seated several places down next to one of Charles's business associates and his wife. They were polite enough, but it was clear we had very little in common. During the dinner, Charles gave a speech about family legacy. "The Whitmore family has always believed in building something that lasts for generations," he said proudly. Several guests applauded. Then he turned toward Ethan. "And we're proud to welcome Ethan into that legacy." Everyone clapped again. Ethan smiled, clearly pleased by the approval. But something about the speech bothered me. Not because Charles was proud of his family, but because there was no acknowledgement of the other half of Ethan's story. The part that came from me. The part that had built everything he stood on. After the dinner, guests lingered in the living room with drinks. I stepped outside onto the terrace for some fresh air. The valley was quiet at night. Rows of vineyard lights stretched across the hills like tiny stars. Ethan joined me a few minutes later. "You doing okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said. He leaned against the railing beside me. "Big day tomorrow," he said. "Yes," I replied softly. There was a pause. Then I decided to ask him something I had been wondering about for months. "Ethan," I said gently, "are you happy?" He looked surprised. "Of course I am," he said. "Good," I replied. I studied his face for a moment. "You know," I added, "I've always been proud of you." His expression softened slightly. "Thanks, Mom." Neither of us said anything more after that. But as we stood there looking out over the vineyards, I wondered if Ethan understood something important. Everything I had built, every early morning in that tiny bakery, every exhausting year after his father died, all of it had been for him. And tomorrow, during the wedding reception, I was planning to give him the most significant gift of all. The documents transferring $45 million, worth of assets. The moment would be simple but meaningful. I imagined standing in front of the guests, congratulating the newlyweds, and telling Ethan that the future of our family's legacy now belonged to him. It would be the proudest moment of my life. But as I watched my son walk back into the brightly lit mansion that night, I couldn't shake a strange feeling. Something about the weekend felt off. The way people spoke, the way I was quietly placed on the edges of every event, the way Ethan kept asking me to stay simple. Still, I ignored the warning signs. Because no matter how uncomfortable things felt, I believed one thing with absolute certainty. A son would never truly humiliate his own mother. And I certainly never imagined that less than 24 hours later, that same son would be locking me in a dark basement while his wedding continued upstairs. The morning of the wedding arrived quietly. I woke up early long before the rest of the house began to stir. For a moment I lay in the large guest bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of preparation starting outside. Even at sunrise, the Whitmore estate was already alive with activity. When I walked to the window and pulled back the curtains, the vineyard stretched across the hills in neat rows of green, glowing softly under the morning light. In the distance, workers were setting up the final decorations for the ceremony. Large white chairs had been arranged in perfect lines across the garden lawn. The glass pavilion stood at the center, its transparent walls catching the golden light of the early morning. It really was a beautiful setting. Down below, catering staff were unloading crates from trucks. Florists carried enormous arrangements of white roses toward the reception tent. Everything looked flawless. The kind of wedding people would talk about for years. I showered and dressed slowly, taking my time. Inside my suitcase, I had brought several formal outfits, but I chose the simplest one, a long navy dress with clean lines and minimal jewelry. Ethan had asked me to keep things low-key, so that's exactly what I did. Before leaving the room, I opened my purse and checked the folder inside. The legal documents from **, Daniel Brooks **, were still there. The contract transferring **, 45% of Jackson Holdings, **, into Ethan's name after the ceremony. $45 million, a lifetime of work. All of it prepared as a wedding gift. For a moment, I imagined the moment I would present it. The guests would be seated in the reception hall, the newly married couple standing beside each other, surrounded by friends and family. I would stand up during the speeches and say something simple, something honest. Ethan. Everything I built was always meant to become yours someday. The thought made me smile. I closed the purse and walked downstairs. The mansion was buzzing with energy. Wedding coordinators moved quickly through the hallways with clipboards and headsets. Makeup artists were already working upstairs with the bridal party. I found Ethan in the main living room speaking with a man adjusting the sound system. He looked nervous but excited, dressed in a tailored tuxedo that fit him perfectly. When he noticed me, he gave a quick smile. "Morning, Mom." "Good morning," I said warmly. "You look great." "So do you," I replied. For a brief moment, he looked like the same young man who used to help me clean flour off bakery counters. But then his attention shifted back to the event planner beside him. "Give me 1 second," he told her before turning back to me. "Everything ready?" he asked. "Yes," I said. There was a short pause between us. "Big day," I added. "Yeah," he said. He looked around the room as if checking who might be listening. Then he leaned slightly closer to me. "Mom, can we talk for a minute?" "Of course." "Somewhere private," he said. I nodded. He gestured toward a hallway leading away from the main room. "Follow me." I didn't think anything of it. The hallway led toward a quieter part of the house, away from the busy wedding preparations. We passed through a kitchen where several staff members were arranging trays of food. None of them seemed to pay much attention to us. Ethan continued walking until we reached a narrow staircase at the end of the corridor. "Down here," he said. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Just a quick conversation," he replied. The stairs led downward into the lower level of the mansion. The lighting became dimmer as we descended. At the bottom, there was a wide concrete hallway with several storage rooms and wine cellars. The air smelled faintly of wood and cool stone. Ethan opened a door to one of the rooms. Inside was a large storage space filled with stacked crates and shelves of wine bottles. "What's this?" I asked. "We use this for extra storage during big events," he said. I stepped inside, glancing around the room. It was quiet down there, far removed from the music and laughter that were beginning upstairs. "Ethan, what did you want to talk about?" I asked. He stood near the doorway, his expression suddenly tense. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he sighed. "Mom," he said carefully, "I need you to do something for me today." "What is it?" I asked. He hesitated again. "Just stay down here for a while." I stared at him. "I'm sorry." He shifted his weight awkwardly. "Olivia's parents are worried about appearances," he said. There are some important guests arriving soon. And I asked slowly, they think it would be better if you avoided the main ceremony. The words hung in the air between us. For a second, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood him. You want me to miss your wedding? I asked quietly. Just until the ceremony is over, he said quickly. Then you can come upstairs later. I felt my chest tighten. Ethan, I said softly, I'm your mother. I know, he replied. Then why would I stay in a basement while my son gets married? His expression hardened slightly. Mom, please don't make this complicated. Complicated, I repeated. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. You don't understand how these things work, he said. What things? These events, he replied. There are expectations. Expectations about what? He exhaled sharply. About how people present themselves. The meaning behind his words finally settled in. He was ashamed. Ashamed that the woman who had raised him had once been a baker. Ashamed that I didn't belong to the polished world of the Whitmore family. Ethan, I said quietly, is this really about appearances? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said something that cut deeper than I expected. Mom, you don't really fit in up there. For a moment, the room felt completely silent. All the noise from the wedding preparations upstairs seemed to disappear. I don't fit in, I repeated. He looked uncomfortable but determined. Please just stay here until the ceremony is finished, he said. Then, before I could respond, he stepped backward through the doorway. Ethan. The door closed. And a second later, I heard the unmistakable sound of a lock turning from the outside. I stood frozen. For several seconds, I simply stared at the door, unable to process what had just happened. Then I walked forward and turned the handle. It didn't move. My son had locked me inside the basement. Above me, the wedding music had already begun to play. And inside my purse, resting quietly against my side, were the documents that would have given him $45 million, as a wedding gift. For a long moment, I simply stood there staring at the closed door. My hand remained on the handle as if somehow the lock might suddenly release if I waited long enough. It didn't. The metal knob refused to move, cold and unyielding under my fingers. On the other side of the door, I could hear Ethan's footsteps walking away down the hallway. They faded quickly, swallowed by the thick walls of the basement. Then there was silence. Not the comfortable kind of silence you find in quiet places. This was heavier. The kind of silence that settles over a room when something irreversible has just happened. I slowly stepped back. The storage room around me suddenly felt smaller than it had a few minutes earlier. Shelves lined the walls filled with bottles of wine and wooden crates labeled with vineyard years and vintages. A single overhead light buzzed softly, casting a pale glow across the concrete floor. The room wasn't dangerous, but it wasn't meant for people either. I took a deep breath and tried the door again. Still locked. Ethan, I called. My voice echoed faintly against the walls. No answer. I knocked harder. Ethan, this isn't funny. Nothing. The realization slowly settled into my chest like a stone. My son had not only asked me to stay out of sight, he had locked me away. The wedding music drifted faintly through the ceiling, above me soft violin notes from the orchestra beginning the ceremony. I looked at my watch. It was 10 minutes before the guests would start taking their seats in the garden. 10 minutes before my son walked down the aisle, without his mother. I stepped back from the door and leaned against one of the shelves, trying to steady myself. Shock does strange things to the mind. Instead of anger, the first emotion that came over me was disbelief. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, searching for some explanation that made sense. Maybe Ethan had panicked. Maybe Olivia's parents had pressured him into doing something he didn't truly want to do. Maybe he planned to unlock the door in a few minutes. But deep down, I knew the truth. He had made the decision. And the look on his face when he said, "You don't fit in up there," told me exactly why. I walked slowly across the room, trying to find another exit. There wasn't one. The basement storage area had only a single door leading back to the hallway. There were no windows, just thick stone walls designed to keep the temperature cool for the wine collection. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course not. We were below ground level. For a moment, frustration flared through me. I walked back to the door and knocked again, harder this time. "Is anyone out there?" I called. My voice sounded strangely small in the empty room. No one answered. Upstairs, the faint sound of music grew louder. The ceremony must have started. Guests were probably taking their seats among the vineyard rows, smiling and whispering as they waited for the bride to appear. I imagined Ethan standing beside the officiant under the glass pavilion, calm, confident, ready to begin the next chapter of his life. Without me, I felt something tighten in my chest. Not quite anger, but something deeper, a kind of quiet heartbreak. For a long time, I had believed that Ethan's behavior over the past year was temporary, that the pressure of Olivia's world had simply made him nervous or distracted. But locking me in that basement wasn't a moment of stress. It was a decision. A decision to hide the person who didn't match the image he wanted to present. I slowly sat down on one of the wooden crates. The room felt colder now. Above me, the orchestra began playing a familiar melody, the wedding processional. The bride was walking down the aisle. For a moment, I closed my eyes. Memories started surfacing unexpectedly. Ethan as a child running through the bakery kitchen with flour on his face. Ethan at 16 proudly showing me the acceptance letter from Berkeley. Ethan hugging me outside the restaurant the night he introduced me to Olivia. All of those moments seemed to belong to a completely different person. I opened my eyes again and reached into my purse. The folder with the legal documents rested inside exactly where I had placed it earlier that morning. I pulled it out slowly. The thick stack of papers felt heavier than it should have. At the top of the page was the official title, ***, Transfer of Ownership Agreement, Jackson Holdings, ***, 45% of my investment portfolio, worth $*$45 million, ***. All prepared for Ethan. I had imagined handing these papers to him with pride. Now they sat quietly in my hands while he celebrated upstairs without me. For a moment I wondered if I should laugh. The situation was almost absurd. My son had locked the one person who planned to give him the largest gift of his life inside a basement. But the humor faded quickly, because what hurt most wasn't the insult. It was the realization that Ethan no longer saw me as someone important in his world. He saw me as a problem to manage, a detail to hide, a reminder of a past that didn't fit with the future he wanted. I set the papers back into my purse. Another 30 minutes passed, then 40. Time moved slowly in the quiet room. Occasionally, I could hear faint bursts of applause through the ceiling. The ceremony must have ended. The guests were probably congratulating the newly married couple now. Soon they would move inside for the reception. Toasts, music, dancing, an entire celebration. And I would still be sitting in a basement. The thought might have broken me if I had been a different kind of person. But decades of running a business had taught me something important. You can't control how people treat you, but you can control how you respond. I stood up again and walked toward the door. This time I didn't pound on it. Instead, I listened carefully. At first, I heard nothing. Then faintly footsteps. Someone was moving in the hallway outside. I knocked firmly. "Hello," I called. The footsteps paused. For a moment, there was silence. Then a man's voice spoke from the other side of the door. "Is someone in there?" "Yes," I replied quickly. "The door is locked." There was a brief pause. Then I heard the rattle of the handle. A few seconds later, the lock clicked. The door slowly opened. Standing in the doorway was a young man wearing a catering uniform. He looked confused. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought this room was empty." "It wasn't," I replied calmly. He stared at me for a moment. Then his eyes widened slightly. "Aren't you the groom's mother?" "Yes," I said. His confusion deepened. "That's strange," he said. "They told everyone you had already left." I felt a chill run down my spine. Ethan hadn't just locked me in the basement. He had told the entire wedding that I wasn't there, that I had gone home. For the first time since the door closed behind me, something new stirred inside my chest. Not heartbreak, not confusion, but clarity. Because now I understood something important. My son hadn't simply made a mistake. He had planned to erase me from the most important day of his life. What he didn't know was that I was about to walk upstairs. And the moment I did, everything about that wedding was going to change. The young man standing in the doorway looked genuinely confused. He was probably in his mid-20s, wearing the black and white uniform of the catering staff. A tray cloth was folded over his arm, and his expression suggested he had just stumbled into something he didn't quite understand. "I'm really sorry," he said again. "I thought this room was empty." "It's all right," I replied calmly as I stepped out of the storage room. The hallway felt brighter after the dim light inside. "What's your name?" I asked. "Marcus," he said. "Marcus Reed." "Well, Marcus," I said gently, "thank you for opening the door." He still looked puzzled. "I didn't realize anyone was down here," he admitted. "They told the staff the groom's mother had already left the property." The words confirmed what I had suspected. Ethan hadn't simply hidden me. He had erased me. Did they say why I left? I asked. Marcus shook his head. No, ma'am, just that you had an emergency flight back to Chicago. I almost smiled at that. An emergency. Apparently, my disappearance had been explained away with a convenient story. Marcus hesitated before asking another question. If you don't mind me asking, why were you locked in there? For a moment, I considered telling him everything. But Marcus was just a young employee doing his job. He didn't deserve to be pulled into the drama of a wealthy family's wedding. Miscommunication, I said simply. He nodded, though it was clear he didn't entirely believe the answer. Well, he said awkwardly, the ceremony just ended about 20 minutes ago. Has the reception started? I asked. Not yet, he replied. Guests are moving inside now. The speeches should begin soon. Perfect timing. I thanked Marcus again and walked toward the staircase leading back to the main floor. As I climbed the steps, I could hear the sounds of the reception beginning. Laughter. Music. The clinking of glasses. When I reached the top of the stairs, the mansion looked completely transformed. Guests filled the hallways in elegant evening attire, chatting happily as servers passed trays of champagne. No one seemed to notice me at first, which made sense. Most of these people believed I wasn't even there. I walked slowly through the crowd, observing the scene around me. The reception hall had been set up in the mansion's grand ballroom. Large crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light across the room. Round tables covered in white linens filled the space, each decorated with elaborate floral arrangements. At the front of the room stood a raised platform where the wedding party would give their speeches. A string quartet played softly in the corner. It was breathtaking and incredibly expensive. Every detail reflected the kind of luxury the Whitmore family loved to display. As I moved through the crowd, I noticed something else. The seating chart displayed near the entrance. Guests were studying the board, looking for their assigned tables. Curious, I stepped closer. My name was there. Asterisk, asterisk. Laura Jackson. Asterisk, asterisk. But instead of being listed as the asterisk, asterisk, mother of the groom, asterisk, asterisk, it appeared under a small table near the back of the room, table 28, far from the main table, far from the spotlight. It was clear Olivia had kept her promise about balancing the seating. I looked around the ballroom again. At the center of the room stood the main table. Ethan and Olivia sat there surrounded by the Whitmore family and several prominent guests. Olivia looked radiant in her wedding gown. Ethan looked proud, confident, as if nothing unusual had happened that day. For a moment, I simply watched them from across the room. This was the moment I had imagined for months. The moment when I would walk forward, congratulate my son, and give him the gift that represented everything I had built. Instead, he believed I was gone. I could have left quietly. No confrontation, no drama, just disappear the way he wanted. But as I stood there watching the celebration, something inside me shifted. Not anger, clarity, because Ethan needed to learn something important. Respect is not optional in a family, and hiding your own mother has consequences. Just then, the music faded. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with a smile, "if we could have your attention for just a moment." The room gradually grew quiet. "We're about to begin the speeches for this evening," he continued. "But first, let's take a moment to congratulate our beautiful couple." Applause filled the room as Ethan and Olivia stood. They smiled, holding hands, while guests cheered. Charles Whitmore raised a glass of champagne proudly. Victoria Whitmore looked pleased with the flawless event she had helped orchestrate. The MC continued, "We'll begin with a few words from the bride's father, Mr. Charles Whitmore." Charles stood and walked confidently to the stage. His speech was polished and practiced. He spoke about family traditions, about welcoming Ethan into the Whitmore legacy, about the bright future awaiting the couple. The guests listened attentively, occasionally laughing at his carefully rehearsed jokes. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Next came Victoria, then Olivia's maid of honor. Each speech followed the same pattern. Elegant stories, warm congratulations, and praise for the Whitmore family's hospitality. Throughout it all, no one mentioned the groom's mother. According to the story Ethan had created, I was already on a plane back to Chicago. Finally, the MC stepped forward again. And now he said, glancing at his notes, we would normally invite the groom's mother to share a few words. A brief pause followed. The MC looked slightly confused. I was told earlier that she unfortunately had to leave due to an emergency. A murmur of polite sympathy moved through the crowd. But before the MC could continue, a calm voice spoke from the back of the room. "That won't be necessary." Every head turned. I stepped forward, slowly walking through the aisle between the tables. For a moment, the entire ballroom seemed frozen. 400 guests watched silently as I approached the stage. Ethan's face turned pale the moment he saw me. Olivia's smile vanished. Charles Whitmore's expression hardened with confusion. The MC stepped aside uncertainly as I reached the front of the room. I took the microphone gently from his hand. "Good evening," I said. My voice carried clearly through the ballroom. "I'm Laura Jackson ***. I glanced briefly toward Ethan's mother. The room was completely silent now. "I apologize for arriving late to the speeches," I continued calmly. Then I lifted the folder from my purse. "But I came today with something important for my son." I paused for just a moment. "A wedding gift worth $45 million ***. The reaction in the room was immediate. Gasps, whispers, shock spreading across every table. Ethan stared at me as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Olivia looked like she had stopped breathing. But I wasn't finished yet, because the most important part of my speech hadn't even begun. For several seconds after I spoke those words, the ballroom remained completely silent. It was the kind of silence that feels almost physical heavy and stunned, pressing down on every person in the room. 400 guests sat frozen in their chairs. Some of them looked confused. Others leaned toward the people beside them, whispering quietly. But most of them were staring directly at me, or at the folder in my hands. Across the room, Ethan looked like he had just seen a ghost. His face had gone pale, and his mouth opened slightly as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Olivia's reaction was different. Her eyes were locked on the folder in my hand. Not on me, not on Ethan, on the documents. Charles Whitmore slowly stood from the main table, his brow furrowed with confusion. $45 million, someone whispered from one of the nearby tables. The murmur spread quickly through the room. I let the whispers continue for a moment before speaking again. "I realize that number might sound surprising," I said calmly, "but I've spent most of my life building something I hoped would someday belong to my family." I lifted the folder slightly. "These documents transfer 45% of my investment portfolio to my son, Ethan Jackson." More murmurs. Some guests were now openly staring. Others had taken out their phones, probably already texting people outside the room about what was happening. I continued speaking, my voice steady. "The assets come from a company I founded more than 35 years ago." A few people in the crowd exchanged curious looks. "A small bakery in Chicago," I added. I saw several expressions change. Recognition. Interest. Over the years, that bakery grew into a national food company called ***. Jackson Foods ***. Charles Whitmore's eyes widened slightly. Apparently, he recognized the name. "We expanded into 17 states," I continued, "and 6 years ago, I sold the company." A man at one of the nearby tables suddenly leaned toward his companion. "Jackson Foods," he whispered loudly. "That sale was huge." I didn't comment. Instead, I looked directly at Ethan. "I had planned to present this gift after the ceremony," I said gently. He still hadn't moved. His hands rested on the edge of the table as if he needed it to stay standing. For me, I continued, "This gift represented trust." The room remained quiet enough that every word echoed clearly. It meant that the responsibility for our family's legacy would pass to the next generation. I opened the folder and pulled out the top page of the legal documents. "This contract gives Ethan control over a significant portion of my investments." I paused briefly. $45 million. The number seemed even louder the second time. Guests shifted in their seats. A few of them looked openly stunned now. At the main table, Olivia's eyes were fixed on Ethan. Her expression had changed from shock to something sharper, something calculating. Charles Whitmore stepped forward slightly. "Laura," he said carefully, "this is quite unexpected." "Yes," I replied. His tone was polite, but the surprise on his face was obvious. Victoria Whitmore looked less composed. Her perfectly controlled expression had cracked slightly. But Ethan still hadn't spoken. Finally, he stood. "Mom," he began. His voice sounded thin. I raised my hand gently, stopping him. "I'm not finished yet," I said. The room grew quiet again. I turned slightly so that everyone could see both me and Ethan. "There's just one small detail I should mention," I continued. The guests leaned forward. "This gift had one simple condition." Ethan's expression tightened. "What condition?" Charles Whitmore asked cautiously. I smiled softly. The person receiving it had to understand something important. I looked at Ethan again. That family deserves respect. The words hung in the air. For a brief moment, no one moved. Then I continued. You see, when I arrived this morning, I came early so I could give Ethan this gift privately. I held up the folder again. These documents were in my purse all day. Guests began exchanging confused glances. But something unusual happened before the ceremony. Ethan's shoulders stiffened. Olivia turned toward him slowly. I took a small breath. My son asked me to speak with him in private. Several guests leaned closer, sensing the shift in my tone. He led me downstairs into the basement of this house. The murmurs grew louder. I kept my voice calm. He told me that I didn't belong upstairs with the guests. At the main table, Olivia's face drained of color. Charles Whitmore looked sharply toward Ethan. And then I said quietly, he locked the door. The reaction was immediate. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. People turned toward Ethan, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disbelief. Ethan looked like he wanted the floor to open beneath him. Mom, that's not, he began. I raised my hand again. He locked me in a storage room, I said. My voice remained steady. And then he told everyone here that I had already left. Marcus, the catering employee who had freed me earlier, was standing near the back of the room. He looked stunned. Around him, several staff members were whispering among themselves. The guests in the ballroom had completely forgotten about their drinks, their food, and the celebration. Now they were watching something far more dramatic unfold. Charles Whitmore slowly turned toward Ethan. Is this true? He asked sharply. Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came out. That silence answered the question. Olivia stared at him in shock. You told me she went back to Chicago, she whispered. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, panic spreading across his face. You didn't think, Olivia interrupted. The tension between them was suddenly visible to everyone in the room, but I wasn't done yet. I looked back at the guests. I spent nearly 40 years building my business, I said. Not for wealth, but for my family. I placed the documents back into the folder slowly, and today I plan to give my son everything I built. I paused, but respect isn't something money can buy. The room was so quiet that even the clink of a glass in the back sounded loud. I looked at Ethan one last time. Then I spoke the words that would change everything. And a man who locks his mother in a basement on his wedding day? I closed the folder. It's not ready to inherit $45 million. A collective gasp spread across the ballroom, because everyone understood what that meant. The gift was no longer his. The silence after my last sentence felt heavier than anything that had come before. 400 people sat frozen in their chairs staring at the stage as if they had just witnessed something unreal. The orchestra in the corner had stopped playing entirely. Even the waitstaff stood still, trays suspended in midair. All eyes were on Ethan. My son looked like someone had just pulled the ground out from beneath him. His shoulders were stiff, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. Mom, please, he said quietly. The word asterisk, please, asterisk sounded strange coming from him now. A few minutes earlier, he had believed I was gone. Now the entire room knew the truth. Olivia stood slowly from her seat beside him. Her eyes moved between Ethan and me, searching for some explanation that would make sense of what she had just heard. You locked her in the basement, she asked. Her voice was not loud, but in the silent room it carried clearly. Ethan looked at her. It wasn't like that, he said quickly. How was it then, Olivia demanded? He hesitated. It was just temporary, he said weakly. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Charles Whitmore stepped forward toward the stage. His face had lost the confident calm he carried earlier in the evening. Ethan, he said sharply, did you actually lock your mother downstairs during the ceremony? Ethan didn't answer immediately. That pause was enough. Charles exhaled slowly, clearly struggling to maintain control of the situation. Victoria Whitmore, who had spent the entire evening looking perfectly composed, now looked genuinely embarrassed. Her eyes flicked around the room, aware that hundreds of influential guests were witnessing the unraveling of the carefully orchestrated wedding. I remained standing at the microphone, not angry, just calm, because the truth had already done its work. Ethan turned toward me again. Mom, I didn't think it would turn into this, he said. That's exactly the problem, I replied gently. You didn't think. A murmur passed through the crowd. Ethan looked desperate now. I was under pressure, he said. Olivia's parents wanted everything perfect. Perfect, I asked. He nodded quickly. They said the guest list included important people who expect a certain image. And your solution was to hide your mother in a basement, I said. The words landed like a stone in the room. Ethan opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. Olivia stared at him in disbelief. "You told me your mother had to leave because of an emergency," she said. "I thought it would be easier that way," Ethan replied weakly. Easier for who, she asked. Ethan had no answer. Charles Whitmore rubbed his temple, clearly irritated. "This is not the kind of spectacle we wanted tonight," he muttered. But it was already too late for that. The spectacle had happened, and everyone in the room had witnessed it. I took a small step away from the microphone, letting the moment breathe. Then I spoke again. "When I started my bakery 35 years ago, I said I didn't have money connections or influence. Guests, listen carefully. All I had was hard work and the belief that if I built something meaningful, it could create a better life for my family." I glanced at Ethan briefly. That belief carried me through every difficult year. Some of the older guests nodded quietly. Entrepreneurs recognize that story. But somewhere along the way, I continued, my son began to believe that success meant hiding where he came from. Ethan looked down at the floor. "That's not true," he said quietly. "Isn't it?" I asked. "You told me I didn't belong upstairs," I reminded him. "You said I would embarrass you." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Others looked directly at Ethan, their expressions far less sympathetic now. Olivia crossed her arms slowly. "You said that she asked him." Ethan didn't respond. The silence confirmed everything. Victoria Whitmore stepped forward slightly. "Laura," she said carefully, "perhaps this conversation would be better held privately." I shook my head. "No," I said calmly. "This happened publicly, so it deserves to be understood publicly." Her lips pressed into a thin line. But she didn't argue, because she knew I was right. I turned back to the guests. "The $45 million I mentioned earlier was never just about money," I said. "It was meant to represent trust." I held the folder up again. A transfer of responsibility. Ethan looked at the documents like a drowning man staring at a lifeboat drifting away. "Mom, please," he said again. "I'll fix this." "How?" I asked. He hesitated. I'll apologize," he said. "You already are," I replied. "And that's good. But apologies don't erase choices." The room remained silent. Finally, I walked toward the edge of the stage. "I want to make something clear," I said. "I'm not angry." Several guests looked surprised by that. But it was true. Anger burns fast. What I felt was something quieter. Disappointment, sadness, and a strange sense of relief. Because now I understood who my son had become. "I still love Ethan," I said honestly. "That will never change." Ethan looked up quickly. Hope flickered across his face. But the next words ended it. However, I continued, "Love does not mean rewarding disrespect." The room was silent again. I opened the folder and looked down at the legal contract. The pages were neatly printed, waiting for Ethan's signature. They represented decades of effort, years of sacrifice, everything I had built. Slowly, deliberately, I closed the folder. "The Jackson family legacy will continue," I said. "But not today." I turned slightly toward the audience. "Instead of transferring these assets to Ethan tonight, I've decided to place them somewhere else." Guests leaned forward again, where someone whispered. I looked directly at them. "Into a new charitable organization." Several people exchanged surprised glances. "The *** Laura Jackson Foundation, ***, I continued. "It will provide funding for women who want to start their own businesses." A few guests began nodding, especially single mothers who need the same opportunity I once had. The idea resonated with many people in the room. Applause began slowly. Then it grew louder. The sound filled the ballroom. Ethan looked completely stunned. $45 million had just vanished from his future. Olivia stared at him, her expression impossible to read. Charles Whitmore shook his head slowly. And as the applause echoed through the room, one thing had become painfully clear. The wedding celebration had just turned into the most unforgettable lesson Ethan Jackson would ever experience. The applause that followed my announcement didn't happen all at once. At first, it was just a few scattered claps from different corners of the ballroom. Then more guests joined. Within seconds, the sound grew louder, filling the entire room with a wave of approval that echoed against the high ceilings. 400 people were now applauding, not for the wedding, for the decision. I stood quietly on the stage while the sound carried through the room. Across the ballroom, I could see a wide range of reactions. Some guests looked impressed. Others looked stunned. A few appeared deeply uncomfortable. But no one looked more shaken than Ethan. He hadn't moved since I announced the creation of the foundation. His face was pale, and his eyes remained fixed on the folder in my hands as if the papers inside might somehow disappear. Olivia sat beside him in silence. Her earlier shock had faded, replaced by a cold stillness. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at Ethan, and the expression on her face told me she was reevaluating everything she thought she knew about him. Charles Whitmore stepped closer to the stage. He was a man used to controlling situations, a man who built his career on projecting confidence and authority. But at that moment, he looked like someone struggling to regain control of a story that had slipped completely out of his hands. "Laura," he said, forcing a polite smile, "your generosity toward charitable causes is admirable." His tone was careful, diplomatic, but underneath it I could hear something else: damage control. He glanced briefly at the guests seated around the room. "We all respect philanthropy," he continued, "but perhaps this evening should still remain focused on celebrating Ethan and Olivia." Several people nodded. Others remained silent. Charles was trying to steer the room back toward the wedding, back toward the event he had spent months planning. But the atmosphere had changed too much. The story everyone would remember from this evening was no longer the ceremony. It was the revelation, and he knew it. I gave him a small nod. "I agree," I said calmly. "Tonight should absolutely celebrate the couple." Then I turned toward Ethan again. He looked like he wanted to say something, but wasn't sure where to begin. Finally, he stood. "Mom, can we talk privately?" he asked. His voice was quiet now, almost fragile. I studied him for a moment. The confident groom who had stood proudly beside Olivia earlier that evening had disappeared. In his place stood a man suddenly aware that the choices he made had consequences. "We can talk later," I said gently. "But right now, your guests are waiting." Ethan looked around the room. The attention of hundreds of people was still focused on him. He nodded slowly. But before he could sit down again, Olivia stood. Her chair scraped softly against the floor. "Actually," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "I think we should talk now." Ethan looked at her nervously. "Olivia, you told me your mother left because of an emergency," she said. Her eyes locked onto his. "That wasn't true." He hesitated. "No," he admitted. "Why?" she asked. Ethan glanced around the room again. The attention made him uncomfortable. "Because I thought it would make things easier," he said quietly. Olivia's expression hardened. "Easier for who?" "For everyone," he replied. Her laugh was short and bitter. "For everyone?" She gestured toward me. "You locked your mother in a basement." A ripple of whispers moved through the guests again. Ethan rubbed his forehead. "I didn't think she'd be down there that long," he said. "That's supposed to make it better?" Olivia asked. Charles Whitmore stepped forward again, clearly trying to contain the growing tension. "Olivia," he said firmly, "this isn't the place." But Olivia ignored him. Her attention remained fixed on Ethan. "You told me your mother might embarrass us," she said. Ethan's silence answered the question. Olivia looked at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head slowly. "I thought you meant she was socially awkward," she said. Ethan didn't respond. "I didn't realize you meant you were ashamed of her." Those words landed harder than anything I had said earlier. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Because Olivia had just spoken the truth, everyone now understood. Ethan looked up at her. "I wasn't ashamed," he insisted. "Then why hide her?" Olivia asked. Again, he had no answer. Charles Whitmore exhaled sharply. "This conversation is not appropriate for the middle of a wedding reception," he said. But the damage was already done. Guests were watching closely, not out of cruelty, but out of fascination. Moments like this reveal character more clearly than any speech. Olivia turned back toward me. For the first time since I walked into the room, she looked directly into my eyes. "Laura," she said quietly. I didn't know. I believed her. Her voice didn't carry the defensiveness I expected. It sounded more like realization. "I'm sorry," she added. The apology surprised me, not because it fixed anything, but because it showed something Ethan had forgotten. Respect. I nodded. "Thank you," I said simply. Olivia looked back at Ethan again. "You lied to me," she said. "I was trying to protect the image of the event," he replied. Olivia shook her head. "No," she said. "You were protecting your own ego." The room was silent again. Even Charles Whitmore didn't interrupt this time, because he understood something important. The conversation had moved beyond the wedding, beyond appearances. Now it was about character. Olivia stepped back from Ethan slowly. "I can handle complicated family dynamics," she said. "But I can't build a life with someone who treats his own mother like a problem to hide." Ethan's eyes widened. "Olivia, wait." But she was already walking away from the table. Victoria Whitmore hurried after her daughter. Charles stood still for a moment longer before shaking his head and following them. The main table now looked strangely empty. Guests whispered quietly around the room. The wedding reception had officially turned into something else entirely. Ethan remained standing alone near the center of the ballroom. He looked around at the crowd, at the guests, at me. The realization of what had just happened was finally settling in. Not just the loss of $45 million, but the collapse of the image he had tried so hard to build. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan took a slow step toward the stage. "Mom," he said quietly, "I think I made the biggest mistake of my life." The words hung in the air, and for the first time that evening, my son looked exactly like the frightened boy who once slept on a blanket behind the counter of my bakery. The ballroom had changed completely. Just an hour earlier, it had been filled with music, laughter, and the excitement of a wedding celebration. Now the atmosphere was quieter, tense in some places, reflective in others. Guests spoke in low voices, their conversations circling around what they had just witnessed. Some people were still seated at their tables. Others had moved toward the bar or the edges of the room, giving Ethan and me space. The orchestra had quietly packed away their instruments. Even the catering staff moved more slowly now, aware that the evening had taken an unexpected turn. Ethan stood near the stage, looking like someone who had just watched his carefully constructed world fall apart. He glanced toward the exit where Olivia had disappeared with her parents. Then he looked back at me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The distance between us felt larger than the ballroom itself. Finally, he walked toward the stage. "Mom," he said quietly. His voice sounded different now. Gone was the confident tone he had used when speaking to investors and guests earlier in the evening. Now he sounded uncertain, vulnerable. "I'm sorry," he said. It wasn't a long speech, just 2 words, but they carried weight. I stepped down from the stage so we were standing at the same level. Around us, the guests continued watching. No one pretended not to notice. This moment mattered too much. "I know," I said gently. Ethan rubbed his hands together nervously. "I didn't expect things to go like this," he admitted. "That's because you didn't think about what you were doing," I replied. He nodded slowly. "You're right." There was a long pause. Finally, he spoke again. I got caught up in everything he said. The expectations, Olivia's family, the business connections. He looked down at the floor. I started believing that if I didn't look like I belonged in their world, I would lose everything. I listened quietly. He continued, and somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that hiding parts of my life would make things easier. "Parts of your life?" I asked. He looked up. "You," he said. The honesty of the answer surprised some of the guests nearby, but it didn't surprise me, because deep down I had already known. Ethan swallowed hard. "I wasn't ashamed of who you are," he said quickly. "I was ashamed of how I thought other people might see you." "That's the same thing," I replied softly. He closed his eyes briefly. "I know," he said. For several seconds, we stood in silence again. Across the room, I noticed Olivia watching from the doorway. Her parents stood beside her, their expressions unreadable. They hadn't left yet. They were waiting to see what would happen next. Ethan followed my gaze and noticed them too. His shoulders slumped slightly. "I think I just destroyed my marriage," he said quietly. "That's not something I can fix for you," I replied. "I know." He hesitated before asking the question that had clearly been sitting in his mind since the moment I announced the foundation. "Are you really giving all of it away?" he asked. "The $45 million. Yes," I said. He looked down again. Not angry, just stunned. "I guess I deserve that," he said. "This isn't about punishment," I replied. "It's about responsibility." He looked confused. "What do you mean?" I took a small breath before answering. "Money is power," I said, "and power magnifies character." Several guests nearby listened carefully. If someone already respects the people who helped them succeed, I continued, money allows them to do even more good. But if someone lacks that respect, I let the sentence trail off. Ethan nodded slowly. "They make bigger mistakes," he finished. "Exactly." Another silence followed. But this one felt different. Less tense. More honest. Finally, Ethan looked at me again. "I wish I could undo what happened today," he said. "I know," I replied. "But life doesn't work that way." He nodded. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be better than the person I was this morning." I studied his face. For the first time that evening, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Humility. Not the polished confidence he had learned from Olivia's world. Something deeper. Real. Across the ballroom, Olivia stepped forward. She walked slowly toward us, her parents following a few steps behind. When she reached the center of the room, she looked at Ethan. I need some time, she said quietly. He nodded. I understand. She turned toward me. Laura, she said, I meant what I said earlier about not knowing. I believe you, I replied. Her expression softened slightly. You built something incredible, she said, and you deserved respect today. Thank you, I said. She glanced back at Ethan briefly. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. Neither do I, Ethan replied. Charles Whitmore finally spoke. Well, he said dryly, this will certainly be a wedding no one forgets. A few guests laughed quietly. The tension in the room eased slightly. Victoria Whitmore sighed. I suppose the reception is officially over, she said. But I shook my head gently. No, I said. This is still a wedding. Several guests looked surprised. I turned toward Ethan. You made a terrible decision today, I told him. But you're still my son. Emotion flickered across his face. And Olivia, I continued looking at her. You're still his wife. For now, at least. The future of their marriage would depend on choices they made after this night. But the ceremony itself had already happened. Nothing could change that. I looked around the ballroom at the hundreds of guests who had witnessed everything. Life rarely follows the perfect plan we imagine, I said. But sometimes the most important lessons come from the moments we wish had never happened. Ethan nodded slowly. I definitely learned one tonight, he said. And what lesson was that, I asked. He looked directly at me. That the people who help build your life should never be treated like they don't belong in it. The words were simple, but they were the truth. And sometimes the truth arrives in the most painful way possible. The reception ended quietly, not with dancing or fireworks or the kind of joyful chaos most weddings finish with. Instead, guests began leaving, slowly speaking in hushed voices as they gathered their coats and said their goodbyes. Some of them stopped to shake my hand. Others simply gave me respectful nods as they passed. A few even whispered things like, you handled that with incredible grace, or your story is inspiring. I thanked them politely, but my mind was elsewhere. The evening had already stretched far beyond anything I could have imagined when I woke up that morning. A wedding, a revelation, a lesson no one in that ballroom would ever forget. As the crowd thinned, the once crowded ballroom grew quieter. Tables sat half-empty champagne glasses abandoned beside untouched plates of food. The staff began clearing decorations while the remaining guests drifted toward the exits. Ethan remained near the center of the room. He hadn't moved much since our conversation earlier. Olivia stood across the room, speaking quietly with her parents. The distance between them felt enormous. Finally, Ethan walked toward me again. Mom, he said softly. Yes. I know tonight can't be undone, he said. That's true. But I don't want this to be the last chapter of our story. I looked at him carefully. What do you mean? He hesitated. I want to earn back your respect, he said. The honesty in his voice surprised me. He wasn't asking for the money anymore. He wasn't trying to defend his choices. He simply wanted another chance. That won't happen overnight, I told him. I know. And it won't happen because you say the right words, I continued. It will happen because of what you do next. He nodded. I understand. For a moment, the room felt peaceful again. Not perfect, but calm. Then Olivia approached us. Her wedding gown still looked flawless, though the expression on her face was thoughtful. My parents are heading back to the house, she said quietly. Ethan looked at her. Are you going with them? She hesitated. For tonight, she said. He nodded. That makes sense. Olivia turned toward me. Laura, before I leave, I want to say something. I waited. When Ethan told me about his mother, he made it sound like you were simple. The word carried a hint of regret now. I didn't expect to meet someone who built an entire company from nothing. That part of my life never mattered much to me, I replied. But it should have mattered to Ethan, she said. Her eyes flicked briefly toward him. He forgot where he came from, she added. Ethan lowered his head slightly. Yes, he admitted. I did. Olivia sighed. This marriage is going to need some serious conversations, she said. That's probably true, Ethan replied. She looked back at me. I hope you know something she said. What's that? You deserve better today. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. Thank you, I said. With that, she walked toward the exit to join her parents. Ethan and I watched her leave. Do you think she'll come back? He asked quietly. That depends on you, I replied. He nodded slowly. I guess I have a lot to prove. Yes, I said. You do. The last of the guests began leaving shortly afterward. Within an hour, the ballroom was nearly empty. Workers removed the floral arrangements while the catering staff packed away the remaining food. The grand celebration that had taken months to plan was dissolving piece by piece. Eventually, Ethan and I stepped outside onto the terrace overlooking the vineyards. The night air was cool. Soft lights still glowed between the rows of grapevines stretching across the hills. It was peaceful again, almost as if the chaos inside the mansion had never happened. Ethan leaned against the railing beside me. When Dad died, he said suddenly, "I remember you working nonstop to keep everything going." I nodded. "Those were difficult years. You never complained," he said. "You just kept building." "That's what parents do," I replied. He looked at the vineyards in silence for a moment. "I think somewhere along the way I forgot what real success looks like," he said. "And what does it look like?" I asked. He glanced at me. "Respect," he said. "Gratitude. Remembering the people who helped you get where you are." I smiled slightly. "That's a good place to start." He took a deep breath. "So what happens now?" I thought about the question for a moment. "The foundation will move forward," I said. $45 million can help a lot of people build their futures." Ethan nodded. "I'm actually glad you're doing that." The answer surprised me. "Really?" "Yes," he said, "because right now I haven't earned the responsibility that money represents." The honesty in his voice told me he meant it, and for the first time all day I felt a small sense of hope. "Maybe someday you will," I said. He looked at me carefully. "You mean that?" "Yes, but that day will come because of who you become," I continued. "Not because you're my son." He nodded. "I understand." We stood quietly together for a few minutes. The vineyards stretched into the darkness, silent and steady under the moonlight. Finally, Ethan spoke again. "Mom?" "Yes. Thank you for coming today." The words were simple, but they meant more than he probably realized. "I wouldn't have missed it," I said, "because even after everything that happened, he was still my son. And families, no matter how complicated they become, always deserve the chance to heal." Family relationships are complicated, especially when success, pride, and social expectations begin to shape how people see the world. Ethan's mistake wasn't simply locking his mother in a basement. His real mistake was believing that success meant hiding where he came from. In reality, the people who stand beside us during our hardest moments are the ones who deserve the greatest respect when life finally becomes successful. Laura didn't punish her son out of anger. She chose to protect the values that built her life: hard work, humility, and respect. Money can build businesses, houses, and even weddings, but it cannot build character. That comes from the choices we make when no one is watching. Sometimes the most powerful inheritance parents give their children isn't money. It's the lesson that respect, gratitude, and honesty matter more than status or appearances. And sometimes those lessons arrive in the most unexpected moments. If you were in Laura's place, what would you have done? Would you still give the $45 million to your child? Or would you make the same decision she did? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Drop your opinion in the comments below. And if stories like this make you reflect on life, family, and the choices we all make, don't forget to ***. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share where you're watching from today. ***. Your stories and perspectives are always part of this community.